What's up everybody, my name is Phosphoros and today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Spellslinger Arcane in the War Within patch 11.0. I'll be telling you exactly what to press in what order for optimal damage, so let's get right into it. So first up, let's take a look at our talents. On the general tree highlighted in green, you'll see the talents that I consider to be a requirement. These are talents that will give you a direct damage increase and should be included in every build. As for the rest of the talents, it's all up to you based on what you feel you need. I like going mostly defensive talents in Arcane Warding, Winter's Protection, Tempest Barrier, Cryo Freeze, Diverted Energy, Accumulative Shielding, and Barrier Diffusion. Mass Barrier and Ice Cold are also really good talents that I highly recommend in pretty much all content. The only exception is you may not want to take Ice Cold if there's a mechanic that you'd rather immune with Ice Block. Keep in mind also that Ice Cold interacts with both Cryo Freeze and Winter's Protection, so you can actually heal for a good chunk of your health over the duration in addition to a 70% damage reduction. Onto the Arcane tree, this is the pure single target build. The single target build revolves mainly around abusing nether precision by weaving arcane missiles together with arcane blasts and arcane barrages. The most notable talents here are Evocation, Arcane Surge, and Touch of the Magi, as these are our major cooldowns. I also want to draw attention to Aether Attunement. This is an important spell to track as it will cause your next arcane missiles to deal 100% increased damage as well as cleave onto nearby targets after you've consumed 3 clearcasting stacks. All the other talents on the arcane tree just serve to buff our spells here and there and aren't really that important. Moving on to the Spellslinger tree, you don't need to track any of these spells, but it's good to know what they do so you can get a feel for why we're casting certain spells when we do. So let's cover the most important ones. First up is Splintering Sorcery. This is a passive that will cause you to shoot out 2 arcane splinters whenever you consume nether precision. Next up is Augury Abounds. This spell causes you to shoot out 8 splinters into your target whenever you cast Arcane Surge, and for the duration of Arcane Surge, you'll also have double splinter generation. Then we have Shifting Shards, which also causes shifting power to shoot out 8 splinters. And finally, our capstone, Splinter Storm. Whenever you have 8 or more active splinters on a target, you'll summon a Splinter Storm, which causes your embedded splinters to shatter and then shoots them back at your target. So as you can see, all of these spells are passive and just augment our damage. We don't really have to track or react to any buffs like we would in Sun Fury. These passives do have some implications on our rotation however, and we'll cover that in the next sections. But first, let's cover the rest of the talent builds. This is the Raid Cleave build. This build simply removes a point in Consortium's Bauble in order to allocate it on Arcane Cleave instead. Pretty self-explanatory here, we just want Barrage to hit nearby targets whenever it can. And lastly, this is the Mythic Plus build. This build is pretty much the same on the Arcane tree as the Raid Cleave build, but the general tree talents are much more optimized around providing utility in a dungeon environment. Remember, you can always mix and match talents on the general tree as you see fit for each dungeon. So what does Arcane's damage pattern look like? Well, Arcane has a very ebb and flow style to its damage pattern. Over the course of about a minute and a half, you'll have a big burn with Arcane Surge, followed by a period of low filler damage, into a mini burn, followed by another period of low filler damage, and then the cycle repeats. I'll be explaining each of these rotations next, but first, I need to cover some important terminology. So the first term I'll cover here is Spellqueuing. Spellqueuing is the act of beginning the cast on one spell, and then as that cast is ending, you begin pressing the keybind for your next spell. Doing this will queue up your second spell to begin casting immediately when the first cast ends, and this is useful because it leaves no gap in casting between the 2 spells. This is also important to understand our next term, double dipping. So what is double dipping? Well, whenever you spellqueue an instant cast spell with a casted spell, very often the instant cast spell will be affected by whatever buffs were present when the casted spell ended. So why is this important for Arcane? Well, when you look at the tooltip for Nether Precision, it says that it will buff your next Arcane Blast or Arcane Barrage. However, if you spellqueue Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage together, you can actually get the buff for both your next Arcane Blast and your next Arcane Barrage. This is why it's so important to understand these interactions, and I'll be telling you when you should or shouldn't spellqueue in the next section. And lastly, let's talk about clipping. Clipping is the act of interrupting any channeled spell with a different spell. In Arcane's case, this would most of the time mean interrupting an Arcane Missile's channel with an Arcane Blast cast. The main reason we do this is because a lot of our damage comes from the nether precision stacks gained from casting arcane missiles rather than the actual missiles themselves. At the moment, the general rule for Arcane is to clip every arcane missile's cast unless you have an Aether Attunement proc. When you have an Aether Attunement proc, you let the cast fully channel. Alright, now that that's all out of the way, let's head into the single target rotation. So usually I explain the rotation starting from the Arcane Surge burn, but this time around I'm going to start with the filler rotation. The reason for this is that Arcane's filler rotation now has a lot more depth than previous iterations of the spec, and even inside our major cooldown windows we're actually doing the filler rotation for optimal damage, so I feel it's important we cover that first. So the filler rotation follows a simple priority list. Cast Shifting Power either during Touch of the Magi, a time anomaly proc to Arcane Surge, or if evocation is around 20 seconds left on cooldown to get it back quicker. Spellqueue Arcane Barrage with Arcane Blast if you have one stack of Nether Precision or Arcane Tempo is about to expire. Cast Arcane Blast with Nether Precision. Cast Arcane Missiles with Clear Casting and make sure to clip this cast unless you have an Aether Attunement proc. Cast Arcane Orb whenever you have less than 2 Arcane Charges. Cast Arcane Blast. And finally cast Arcane Barrage if you run out of mana. Alright, that covers the filler rotation, now let's talk about the burns. So for the Arcane Surge burn, about 3 seconds before the pull starts, you want to cast Evocation to start stacking the damage buff and to generate 1 stack of Clear Casting. As soon as the pull begins, cast Arcane Missiles and clip the channel with an Arcane Orb cast. You then cast Arcane Surge and Spellqueue an Arcane Barrage with it. Then cast Touch of the Magi while Barrage is traveling, but before it lands. At this point you still have 1 stack of Nether Precision, so you want to Spellqueue Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage together. Then cast Shifting Power to generate a bunch of Splinters. From here you just enter into the filler rotation until Touch of the Magi is back off cooldown, and then you're ready to enter the mini burn. The mini burn is very simple now. When Touch of the Magi is coming off cooldown you cast Arcane Barrage, then cast Touch of the Magi while Barrage is traveling but before it lands. Then you enter the filler rotation. From here you pretty much stick to the filler rotation all the way until Evocation's back off cooldown, and the rotation effectively resets back to the Arcane Surge burn stage. Here's a quick 3-minute segment of me performing the single target rotation on a training dummy. I'll have text appear on the screen showing what part of the rotation I'm in so you can follow along, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments. Now let's head into the AoE portion of the guide. As Spellslinger, we want to begin using the AoE rotation when we reach 3 targets. So here's what the filler rotation will look like. Cast Arcane Blast once during Touch of the Magi to proc Magi Spark. Cast Shifting Power either during Touch of the Magi, a time anomaly procced Arcane Surge, or if Evocation is around 20 seconds left on cooldown to get it back quicker. Cast Arcane Barrage whenever you have 4 Arcane Charges or Arcane Tempo is about to fall off. You can also cast it with no Arcane Charges whenever you have your 4-piece bonus. Cast Arcane Missiles with clear casting and make sure to clip this cast unless you have an Aether Attunement proc. Cast Arcane Orb whenever you have less than 2 Arcane Charges. And finally, cast Arcane Explosion. Now let's take a look at the Surge Burn. The Surge Burn is exactly the same as a single target rotation, and then you just entered the AoE filler rotation after completing the opener. Same thing with the mini burn, just barrage into touch, and then enter the AoE filler rotation. Here's a quick 2-minute segment of me performing the AoE rotation on a group of training dummies. Keep in mind that in this clip I'm getting multiple burns out, but in a Mythic Plus scenario, you'll mostly be alternating between the Arcane Surge burn and the mini burn between packs. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. I hope this saved you some time and brought you up to speed. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask in the comments. I'm very active there. Please subscribe, I appreciate the support, and I wish you a very nice day. Take care.